You're listening to The Standard Angler, and my daddy's the host.
All right, well, special thanks to my sweetheart for the introduction, and welcome to The Sustainable Angler, the podcast where we discuss the intersection of fishing, conservation, and sustainability. I'm your host, Rick Crawford. So I'm super excited to share this new 4-part series called The Rise of Sustainability Regulations with special guest James Pollack from Marten Law, where we will take a deep dive into PFAS, extended producer responsibility, and climate regulations that are impacting fishing and outdoor brands all over the country over the next 4 weeks. At Emerger Strategies, I help brands reduce cost, enhance their reputation, and customer loyalty by measuring and improving their sustainability performance. I also help them mitigate risks by helping them navigate PFAS, EPR, and climate regulations. But I thought it would be beneficial for business owners and brands listening to hear it from James, who's an environmental and regulatory lawyer who helps outdoor gear, apparel, and footwear industries reduce their environmental impact and market sustainability in transparent ways. James counsels trusted national brands on the complicated regulatory and litigation environments surrounding material inputs, emerging contaminants, green marketing claims, and climate impacts, and I'm thrilled to share this special podcast series on the rise of sustainability regulations with y'all. In this episode, we are taking a high-level overview of chemical regulations such as PFAS, extended producer responsibility or EPR for packaging and apparel, climate laws, and how to avoid greenwashing. We also discuss future regulations related to supply chain transparency and tips for navigating supplier data collection, as well as how the future of products will involve a deep understanding of your product's impact on the environment and human health. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy. The Sustainable Angler is available anywhere you listen to podcasts and is also airing Saturdays at 2 p.m. on Charleston's first and only community-supported radio station, OHM Radio 96.3 FM. If you like what you're hearing, an absolutely free way to show your support is by leaving the podcast a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. This episode of The Sustainable Angler is brought to you by Emerger Strategies and A New Earth Project, the sustainability initiative of Atlantic Packaging. Did you know that sustainability isn't just the right thing to do, it's smart business? At Emerger Strategies, we simplify sustainability for small and medium-sized businesses, helping you meet retailer demands, build customer loyalty, and protect the planet. Whether you're navigating retailer sustainability assessments, tackling EPR for packaging requirements, or measuring your carbon footprint, we help you measure and improve your brand's sustainability performance. Our clients in the fishing and outdoor industries are thriving, saving time and money and growing their businesses, all while reducing their environmental footprint. We've been simplifying sustainable business since 2016, empowering brands like yours to make a real impact without the need to hire, train, and retain a full-time sustainability team. Ready to make sustainability your competitive advantage? Visit emergerstrategies.com to learn how we can help your business profit sustainably.
We set out with the New Earth Project to really start a movement.
It's a global coalition of people who are deeply concerned and want to accelerate the transition away from problematic packaging to more sustainable solutions.
Our entire value proposition was built on helping companies package things better. We were doing sustainability before sustainability was cool. We just called it packaging optimization. And packaging optimization really is about using less. And we built our whole business on that. You know, people send us their products, their goods, and we help them design packaging systems and solutions for the least possible cost, utilizing the least amount of material. Use less is always the right answer.
And that's what I see with companies like a New Earth Project is it's like, we're just trying to create solutions for big companies and small, that makes it easier for them, cheaper for them, whatever it is, and then has less impact. Not just trying to tell people you should have less impact and making the choice forced on them. Like, make it better for everybody, and it'll make it better for the whole world.
We see the problem, and we are with you.
Great to join you, Rick. And yeah, I'm an attorney at Marten Law. We're what's known in the business as a boutique law firm. We're an environmental law firm. We focus entirely on environmental issues. And as a result, I have colleagues working on all kinds of different issues, ranging from drinking water, real estate transactions involving contaminated property. The work that I do is consumer products related. So I like to frame my practice as a sustainable products practice, really about counseling consumer product manufacturers, brands, retailers, importers on how to bring more sustainable products to market and how to comply with sort of a growing set of sustainability related regulations that are emerging at the state, federal, and international level. I know we're going to get to touch on quite a few of those during the conversation today, but it's a really great practice that's not to overuse the word, but emerging in the market. And it's a really exciting time to get to practice because of all those changes in sustainability that are going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, so for a little bit of context, James and we met. Lucas Bissett introduced us. He's the executive director of American Fly Fishing Trade Association, and we were both at the Confluence conference in New Orleans, whenever that was, a month or two ago or something. But anyway, I listened to you give a presentation on some of the increasing sustainability regulations, and it's stuff that I know, but you were such a good communicator and presenter. I was like, it's always better coming from someone else's mouth, but I wanted to do this episode today because I'm not sure that I think there's a lot of brands out there that aren't fully aware of sort of this rise of sustainability regulations that we're seeing, not just here, but in Europe and everywhere else. So that's really what I wanted to dive into today. So from what I guess with my sustainability consulting practice, what I'm doing is helping companies measure and improve their sustainability performance, help them get third-party certifications to avoid greenwashing, and my sort of focus, I guess, has a lot to do with greenhouse gas accounting, so with carbon footprint, extended producer responsibility related to packaging. And I can help them, point them in the right direction with PFAS, but that's sort of this new area that is becoming really complex and really important really fast. So those are sort of three buckets that I'm familiar with, but I would love to get your take on, are there other buckets? Are there other things that are happening? And I'll stop there and let you run with that, but we'll start there.
Yeah, I mean, you've covered three really critical buckets just right there. And I think another piece of context on my practice is a lot of my clients fit in the outdoor gear, apparel, recreation space. The reason for that is twofold. One is that these are products that tend to have really advanced technical capabilities. You know, you're demanding quite a bit from the product. You want that, you want a really waterproof jacket or a waterproof set of waders. You want a fly reel that's got great friction on it. You know, you're really feeling it when you cast. There's a lot of demand on the products that we use. And from a technical capability perspective, and that means the utilization of some really interesting materials from a chemistry and materials perspective. So uh, uh, that market has a really unique understanding of what's going into their products. At a second level, there's also this connection, the symmetry between these regulations and the consumers that are being targeted with these products. So these are folks who are interested in the waters that they fish in understanding the impact of the things that they purchase on the world around them. And so not only is there alignment with trying to comply with the law, but really a desire to go above and beyond what the law requires. So my practice not only focuses on things relating to chemical inputs, chemistry issues like PFAS, PFAS, which I'm sure we'll dive more into, uh, things like other material inputs that have become targets of regulation, other types of chemistry, ranging from things that folks have heard of, like BPA, things that folks probably have heard less about, but we'll hear more about soon, like BPS or bisphenol S. Um, Other types of material inputs like recycled inputs and understanding how recycled inputs can be effectively used and safely used within products and how to market around the use of those materials. Green marketing is a huge part of the practice, understanding how to navigate making sustainability claims, using certifications correctly, and navigating if challenges arise around the ways that you're representing your products. Um, Climate and greenhouse gas issues are certainly a component, especially as states and international organizations work to recognize particular standards around reporting and disclosure and start to regulate the voluntary carbon offset market. And uh, another piece of this does relate to EPR, exactly what you were describing, these extended producer responsibility regulations that uh, require reporting on the products that are put to market, the packaging that's put to market, and paying fees for the downstream disposal of those products or packaging. Um, Along with those at the international level, we're seeing things like the development of sustainable product regulations in the EU that will change the way that folks need to design for repairability or recyclability. And the development of those regulations is going to really impact the things that we make and put to market. And uh, the last piece, which we haven't really talked on or talked about, relates to supply chain transparency. Uh, there is a growing set of regulations targeting companies to ensure that they understand how their products are made upstream, the materials that go into their products, and ensuring from a labor perspective that forced labor is not used, um, uh, but also understanding other types of inputs into your products, like understanding where the cotton is grown, where the leather comes from, the impacts on forest and the potential impacts on deforestation that those products have, um, and tracing back through your supply chain where these raw materials actually come from. In New York, as well as in Washington State, there have been longstanding debates around what's known as the Fashion Act. This is a potential law that will create pretty radical transparency around supply chains. And this is really sort of the direction of the market, at least from a regulatory perspective, is getting much more visibility on your products, where they come from, where the materials come from, and understanding their impact on the world around us.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting how interrelated, just because of the nature of your specific law practice, it's like these are the things that are directly related to what we're doing in sustainability with brands, right? It's okay.
100%.
Let's figure out from a climate perspective, and this is just for folks out there who are like, how does this work? Like, what is it that you do? So it's like, okay, so we need to understand your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, okay? And scope 1 and 2, for simplicity's sake, is basically operations and electricity. And scope 3 is your value chains. And so part of that to tie supply chain value chain to what James is just talking about with this Fashion Act and supply chain transparency is that it's hard to get to understand your scope 3 emissions if you don't engage with your suppliers. And so once you start to engage with them and start to get better information and data from them, some of these things kind of just come up in conversation and some of it's going to be regulated. So it's like, okay, well, hang on, let's make sure like there's not child labor going on. Like we need to verify that. We need to enforce this. So it's just, it's interesting to see sort of this movement from a regulatory perspective, but from where I sit and the work that I do, I'm also seeing it in a big way from big box retailers. So the Walmarts, the Targets, the REI, basically name any big box retailer, and they're now, it's no longer politely asking, what is your scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions? It's requiring it and then saying, if you're not able to provide this information, we can find someone to fill your shelf space. And to follow sort of the same track that James, that you're just talking about, it starts with emissions. And then now increasingly, we're starting to see the rise of sort of, okay, you need to also understand your company's impacts on nature and biodiversity and really the social impact of your supply chain. So that's just what I see on a 30,000-foot view. But I just find it so fascinating listening to you talk about all this, because I'm just like, yeah, this all makes sense. It's like the evolution of it, right? And so
Yeah.
the more you dig in, right?
I think what's really interesting about my practice is that it's a legal practice that didn't really exist a decade ago, 2 decades ago. It's a legal practice that's built on work that's been done for decades by sustainability folks who are now increasingly finding themselves as compliance folks. Maybe they didn't get into it to be compliance managers or, compliance leads. But often my entry point to a brand or to a retailer is through their sustainability team, who have been for a long time championing from the inside the use of sustainable materials, the phase out of chemistries that have been recognized to be harmful, the need to understand their emissions and reduce those emissions. These are teams that have been doing this work along with foundational consultants and certifications and other entities that have been doing this work for decades to really understand at a fundamental level, what is the impact on the environment of this pair of pants or of this set of waders or these boots or you name it. And what's really cool about the practice is that I get to help make that work fit with this increasingly regulated space. How do we translate this existing work to the legal sphere? How do we build your chemical management strategy, your carbon transparency strategy into your contracts with your supply chain? And that's ultimately what a lot of this comes down to, is how do you ensure good data coming in? How do you do your due diligence to investigate that data? Whether that data is carbon, whether that data is chemical inputs, whether that data is labor practices. This is a data management exercise that's been done for decades by sustainability folks. How do we ensure the fidelity of that information coming in? How do we conduct due diligence, make sure that it's correct? correct things that are found that are incorrect? How do we address these issues through fundamental legal mechanisms like contract, to then provide on the back end information to retailers, regulators, consumers, to make sure that you have an accurate story to tell. And that can be expressed through disclosures in the voluntary form, through reports to government entities, or in your green marketing. And in all those cases, data fidelity, making sure you have good data, is such a key piece of it. So it's really cool to get to translate these things that have been going on for decades into the legal realm. I see that that's a growing part of the practice and makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and I'm curious, what are typically when you're working with a client, with any of these, right? But for the sake of simplicity, let's just say that there's three buckets. There's climate, there's EPR, and there's chemical. Okay, just for simplicity's sake. What are some of the challenges that these companies that you're advising and working with face, and from a legal perspective?
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges, and this kind of covers everything, is the realities of an international market. You're working with factories potentially overseas or potentially domestically that are working to themselves understand the requirements that you face as a brand domestically in the United States. The requirements that you face are fundamentally different from the requirements that a finished good factory themselves face, and working to translate it to them, explain to them, educate them, this is the information that we need. They themselves have their own supply chain. And there's a really great slide that I wish this was a visual medium so I could share it. But there's a great slide that I've seen where someone tried to understand their supply chain. And you often hear about these different tiers in your supply chain. There's the tier one, which is your finished good factory. So if I'm producing a jacket, I am contracting with a factory that actually constructs the jacket. And that's my tier one. So I'm ordering jackets from them. I might be telling them I need the jacket to use these types of materials. It needs to have this kind of performance. It needs to be this color. I will be providing them with a list of requirements around the jacket. Then the jackets will arrive to us and we can sell them. But the jacket making factory itself has its own supply chain. They will have their tier twos, the people who provided them with the actual fabrics that they're going to be sewing and cutting. They have another supplier that provides them with the zippers and the trims. They have another supplier that's providing them with the thread that they use, and another supplier that provides them with the membrane that they put in, and another supplier that provides them with the tags that are sewn in. And each of those suppliers, which is known as a tier two, has their own suppliers, their tier three and tier four, going all the way back to the ultimate supplier, planet Earth. So at each step in that chain, there are challenges in understanding what information needs to be conveyed. How do we ensure the fidelity of that information as it moves through the chain and gets back to where these raw materials were sourced ultimately? And how do you do that across an international supply chain where your tier one may be located somewhere, the tier two is located somewhere else, and the tier three is located somewhere else, with each of those stages involving potentially some trade secrets? Your tier one doesn't necessarily want to share where your tier two is or who they are, because you might cut them out of the deal. So there are a lot of challenges if the goal is information. You can already see there's a lot there are a lot of potential hurdles to getting that information inherent in that exercise.
Mhm.
And so a lot of this is navigating a translation exercise. It's navigating providing information and then getting information using fundamental legal tools, things like non-disclosure agreements, where maybe you agree to not reveal who the source of this information is, but you need that information to provide to regulators, or looking at creative mechanisms to transfer information. But the reality is, this transparency is the way the market and the regulators are moving. Another really great example of this is known as the Digital Product Passport, or the DPP. In the EU, the DPP is going to be a requirement across consumer products where you can understand where things are sourced. This is a super oversimplification, by the way,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it's about working to understand, going back, where were the raw materials sourced and how are they processed and ultimately ending up in the product that you have before you. The first market where this is getting applied to is the EV battery market. And there are a number of vehicle manufacturers that have already announced these QR codes on EV batteries. I think the first mover on this was Volvo, so it's worth taking a look at what they're doing. But the goal is that you can take a look at the battery. There's a QR code. You can scan it. You can see, going back, the full supply chain of how those minerals ended up in the battery that you have before you today. And then part of the goal with that also is to understand, what does the end of life for that battery look like? How do I dispose of it in a responsible way, where then those minerals can potentially be reused again or are disposed of themselves in the way that they need to be? In order to reach that goal, we're going to need to get a lot more visibility on the supply chain, and we will need to understand the magic trick that creates all these products that we have in our garage. And that's going to be a radical change over the next decade that we're all going to be constructing in real time. As a result, it's a very exciting time, but it is a huge challenge for every client that I work with. No matter what kind of information we're trying to get, that is the fundamental goal, is understanding the product more fundamentally, and then providing that information to the right people in the right way.
So that's super helpful for background and also direction. But I think one helpful example, or at least some history for this, at least that's what we studied in my sustainability program, was like, you think about, go back to, I don't know if anyone remembers this, but in the 90s, Nike got busted for child labor, and it was a big deal, and it tarnished their brand. And that was like kind of some of the beginning, early stages of this, right? And then just for some personal history, I was in the green building world. I feel like they're a little bit ahead always for some reason related to products. But, product transparency was started in green building like 10 or 12 years ago. So companies started to disclose their chemical ingredients with health product declarations and declare labels. And they also started to do LCAs and environmental product declarations. And so you kind of use that almost, if you're a brand going like, how could I model something? They're a pretty good place to look, actually. But so you start to see some of this stuff, and it's happening. But anyway, I've been like sitting here listening, like, yes, like chomping at the bit to chime in, because I nerd out on this stuff, and I'm like, yeah, this is where it's headed, right? I mean,
yeah, no, but that's exactly what I'm talking about, is that there are people who have been doing this. This has been sort of cutting edge environmental sustainability work. There are people who know where their cotton is grown, where it's woven, how it ends up in the shirt that they are able to then screen print and provide to you. And they know who's screen printing it. They have all this information. If you have been at the front of this, the cutting edge, you're ahead of the game from a regulatory perspective as well, because you know where it's going. You built it. This is exactly what I think. This is in part regulators catching up to the sustainability discussion that's been ongoing. And it's going to draw everyone else up in that process. So the floor is going to be raised. What compliance means, or to simply comply with the law, 10 years from now, is going to be what is considered now a very cutting edge sustainability program. At least at the international market. I mean, for folks who want to play in that space, it will be essentially the cutting edge of what's current. Even playing domestically in the US, there will be radical changes in the marketplace around sustainability, product inputs, chemicals, exactly what we're describing. Maybe not as radical as the EU, but we're going to see a lot of movement at the state level. And the states are working to pull consumer product manufacturers along on this sustainability journey. There are going to be a lot of changes, but folks who are already ahead of it or are thinking ahead, they're going to be well positioned as a result as these regulations go into effect. And what it makes me think about is, what's the next sustainability journey look like? What are the things we're not thinking about today that if the cutting edge is being incorporated into law, what does the next cutting edge look like? And I think we're starting to see some things emerging, new recycling technologies, new ways to reuse and create that circular economy that we've been aiming for. We're seeing this cutting edge around regenerative agriculture and understanding what are practices to revitalize biodiversity, to revitalize communities. Things like domestic manufacturing and creating new industrial bases here in the United States around consumer products. We're starting to see a lot of this stuff, but it's going to be a really fascinating time over the next 10 years, honestly, in the product space.
It's pretty, yeah, it is, right? I mean, it's pretty wild you just got my wheels totally turning in one way, in a very exciting way, right? Of making things better for everyone, for people on the planet. And in other ways, just things that are gonna, it's like Uber coming up out of nowhere. Like there's going to be breakthroughs and companies that come out of nowhere that solve these problems, and it's pretty exciting time.
Yeah, no, and I mean, I think just to highlight one of those technological leaps that I'm sure that we will see within our lifetime or within the next decade. We've talked a little bit about product end of life and recycling, EPR, the extended producer responsibility. This is a legal framework that's being applied to different product sets, where the folks who put things to market are responsible financially for the end of life of those products. It's a really fundamental principle that's been applied to a number of different products. Things like hazardous materials. So hazardous waste generators need to be responsible for the downstream disposal of those hazardous wastes. That's known as the Superfund or CERCLA program. You also see it in products like mattresses. In a number of states, there are programs where you can call in and they can pick up the mattress and ultimately deconstruct it and recycle it into its component parts. We're seeing this in the packaging space, where packaging will have to be dealt with. The folks who put things to market that use packaging will have to pay a fee to states that have these systems in place to help localities deal with the amount of recycling that they are now having to process. And this is going to help local communities deal with this recycling challenge that they're facing. But the next set of products, the piece that I'm looking at is California, where they just adopted a textile EPR law. And textile EPR is going to require collection. So I used to live in California. We didn't have a bin to put all of our textiles into. I haven't lived in any community where you have a bin, a curbside bin where you can put textiles into. So what this is going to require is the creation of an infrastructure to collect textiles, to collect clothes and drapes and bedding. It may not be a curbside pickup. Maybe it's a central location, but infrastructure will need to be created to collect these textiles, sort those textiles into things that can be reused in their current form. Maybe that shirt could be used again and just needs to go to a thrift. So there's sorting that needs to happen. Then there needs to be an infrastructure to process and recycle those textiles. So identify what cannot be used, what cannot be upcycled and maybe torn apart and used in a new way, but things that have to be downcycled, have to be recycled, pulled apart into component parts, and ultimately processed into new raw material. All that infrastructure needs to be built, and part of this is a technology problem. There are different types of recycling, I've learned. Things like mechanical recycling, where you're essentially pulling apart the fibers into the component pieces. Very easy to do when you have something like a 100% cotton shirt or a 100% wool sweater. You can pull it apart and then you've got, ta-da, new wool that you can then reuse as essentially a raw material. It's harder to do when you have blends, and a lot of technical fabrics are made of blends. And so there are experimental technologies that are coming online in a number of places and that are still under development, known as advanced recycling, where you essentially melt down the materials and are able to separate into the different components this material and create new raw material. This is going to be a radical transformation of how we process and reuse textiles. And a lot of this development with the creation of this new market will happen over the next 10 years. It's going to be whoever is able to figure out how to pull apart composite blends. There's a lot of money to be made there, and people are making investments in that because it's going to be required in California, and certainly other states will move now that California has taken the lead on that. These are the kinds of things we're going to be seeing over the next few years.
And just the way that I see it anyway, just for anyone who's wondering, like, so how does this all work? Like, typically, EU will enact something that's pretty stringent, then California will do it, and then other states get on board with it. So it's like this domino where it's like, well, we're going to do something similar to that, but maybe not as stringent or equally as stringent, whatever. But then California does it, and then other states follow suit. So you can pretty much look to the EU to see what's going to be coming here in the next 10 or so years. And I think we're starting to see that not only with consumer products, but there's you've seen it lately in the news with chemical ingredients and food and things like that. It's just, I think what I'm hearing you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is there is a push for radical product transparency because the consumer has a right to know what they're consuming, and it's the responsibility of the company who is producing it to ensure that their products are not harming people or the environment.
Yeah, and I mean that is like a general expression that then is being implemented through really concrete requirements. And I think your description of how sustainability measures tend to process through the international market is accurate. I will say that it's been a little more sporadic over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. And I think a great example, which we haven't touched on, but maybe we can dive into, is PFAS.
Yep.
PFAS, it's this family of chemicals that is used all across consumer products and in industrial processes. It's a family of, depending on the definition you use, 5,000, 8,000, 12,000, 15,000 chemicals. And these chemicals are used for things like waterproofing, stain proofing, oil proofing, friction reduction, durability, heat resistance. I'm sure listeners can think of all kinds of uses for this chemistry. And those uses have probably been done. Things like stain resistant furniture, water resistant clothing, non-stick cookware, ski wax, lubricants. There have been all kinds of uses for PFAS in the consumer product space. The challenge is that, and I'm going to be careful in the way that I word this, but I'm not trying to be evasive. Scientific knowledge develops, generally speaking, on a chemical by chemical basis. So when you talk about PFAS as a family, it's hard to speak conclusively about a family of chemicals when people are still debating exactly what should fit within the family. But what I will say is old PFAS, well-studied PFAS, have been proven to be harmful. So there are PFAS like things that folks will have heard of on this podcast, probably PFOA, PFOS, Gen X. These are chemicals that are well established in the scientific literature as harmful. And additional PFAS get added to that list of harmful chemicals as scientific knowledge grows. But those are extremely well established as harmful. There are regulations going into effect not only for those subset of PFAS that have been proven in the scientific literature as causing cancer or reproductive harm or other things, but PFAS as a family. And this has happened, surprisingly enough, much more in the United States than in the EU. And I think states are taking the stance of what's known as the precautionary principle. They're implementing a let's regulate the family out of an abundance of caution rather than wait for science to process through each of these chemicals one by one and show this one's harmful, this one's harmful, this one's harmful. Let's regulate the family. And the result has been largely a phase out of PFAS chemistry across products, across consumer products. The first movers in that space have been, unsurprisingly, California, places like California, New York, Colorado, Vermont, Washington State. They've targeted products like food packaging, but also products like textiles and apparel and footwear. The result is we are already seeing radical changes in the outdoor gear and apparel market for products. Products are having to phase out this chemistry and use new chemistry, new membranes as well, to get the same sort of water resistance, oil resistance, stain resistance that was previously attained using PFAS. And as a result, waders will be changing, jackets will be changing, hats will be changing. It's going to be a lot of change on the market in the next few years.
And what, two parts. One, if you're listening to this and you're in Charleston, we have it. Our water that we drink has been above safe levels, and depending on the test that you look at, it's in our fish. It's in Charleston Harbor. Post and Courier did an article about this. So my question is, in what ways is it known to be harmful to humans?
Yeah, so in the drinking water context, and this is part of why it's so useful to work at an environmental law firm. I have colleagues that have been working on PFAS for a decade now. PFAS and I'm going to keep saying PFAS, but especially in the drinking water context, we're actually talking about a subset of PFAS, about trying to think of exactly the number that was under the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule. we're talking about a subset. There's a subset of about half a dozen that have either been regulated or that have recommended dosages or recommended maximum limits at the federal or state level. Those ones have been well recognized to have a variety of different health effects, human health and environmental effects. They include things like reproductive harm, reproductive harm, obesity. They can affect your immune system, and so they can decrease the effectiveness of vaccines. They can affect really, it's kind of an extraordinary set of health effects, and the EPA as well as CDC have put out some really useful charts. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about some of those health effects, you can check that out. There have also been a number of really great popular culture things highlighting PFAS and specifically older PFAS like PFOA and PFOS. Some great examples of that include Exposure, a book by Robert Billett, who was one of the first attorneys to bring a suit against some of the large manufacturers of PFAS. That book was actually turned into a movie called Dark Waters, starring Mark Ruffalo. Kind of like an Aaron Brockovich, but focused on PFAS.
Yeah.
And as a result, Mark Ruffalo has been very outspoken on PFAS regulation as well.
Interesting.
But drinking water historically was one of the most well-recognized sources of exposure. If you're looking at the scientific literature on PFAS exposure, that is a huge source of someone's individual PFAS load. And as a result of EPA regulations, water systems have had to test for PFAS in their drinking water. Charleston is not alone in its impacts on drinking water systems. Their drinking water systems across the country are dealing with PFAS in their drinking water sources that then they have to work to filter out. It's going to be an extraordinary cost to implement those systems, and our firm is working. We represent a number of drinking water systems that are working to identify sources of PFAS contamination in their waters, as well as implement the filtration systems to deal with PFAS in their drinking water. But it's a huge, huge challenge. And as a result of the way that PFAS understanding develops over time, that same process that I was describing earlier, we start to understand the impacts and the challenges around different types of PFAS. The PFOA, PFOS, they're known as long chain PFAS. They have 8 or more carbon atoms in the molecule. Shorter chain PFAS were used as a replacement for those long chain PFAS. And there is a growing recognition around the challenge posed by those chemicals, both from a human health perspective, but also from a filtration perspective. Filters that can deal with long chain PFAS may not be as effective on short chain PFAS, which require the use of new technologies to filter those PFAS out. But the impact on our waters, that's something that we're seeing across the country. There are places like Michigan where there are now health advisories on whether or not to eat fish from freshwater sources because of potential PFAS in fish tissue there. Some of the highest readings of PFAS in animals come from apex predators eating from aquatic sources like polar bears, where because of the sort of trophic flow, the way that molecules move through the environment or energy moves through the environment, those apex predators tend to be where contaminants end up. They aggregate essentially those contaminants. And so polar bears have been found to have really high levels of PFAS as a result of the PFAS in our waters.
That's wild. With greenhouse gas emissions, I know California has, well, the SEC is regulating publicly traded companies, and the California has laws depending on whether you're, I think the starting point's $500 million company, but it has ripple effects because you have suppliers that supply them, I think. So wanted to just, if you could just sort of just give a quick summary of some of these climate regulations affecting brands here in the U.S.
Yeah, and I mean it's useful to start with the SEC only because as we look at potential changes with the upcoming administration, uh, despite the SEC being an independent agency, they've already put on pause the implementation of those regulations. There are a lot of ongoing court challenges relating to the SEC's implementation of greenhouse gas reporting as part of public disclosures. It's maybe we wait and see where the SEC lands on that ultimately. But as a result of that, states are really filling in a lot of these gaps, as well as the EU. And California is a great place to focus. They have implemented their own regulations relating to greenhouse gas disclosures. They have been subject to challenge, and so we will see what those court challenges end up looking like. Some really interesting First Amendment issues being raised in that challenge at a really basic level, whether forced speech or compelled speech is a violation of free speech. But these regulations, should they go into effect, will require companies over certain sizes to disclose their climate impacts, their scope 1 and scope 2, and eventually scope 3 emissions. And it's in line with disclosure requirements that are going into effect in the EU as well. So there is this sort of cross ocean alignment around how to implement these standards, what sorts of reporting standards to use, how to process these emissions and the data. California will still need to implement its regulations, that we are sure of this, but it looks like there will be alignment across methodology so that folks can use those same reports in the EU as well as in California. As far as disclosure goes beyond that, I will say one of the places that's become really interesting from a regulatory perspective is the carbon market and the use of offsets. California also implemented a requirement to disclose the use of voluntary carbon offsets and the ways that folks calculate how those offsets work, whether you're using third-party verification of those offsets, what methodologies you're using to account for your own carbon use and the offset of that carbon. Those disclosure requirements are already in effect and apply at the product level as well as at a broader level. So if you're making carbon claims that require the use of these offset mechanisms, it is worth taking a look at whether you've met your disclosure obligations relating to those claims, because otherwise those claims would be considered a violation of the sort of false advertising regime there in California. I know you wanted to, Rick, get into some sort of best practices around greenwashing, avoidance, how to make green claims. I do think the fundamental place to look here in the United States, it is and will continue to be for the foreseeable future, the green guides, the FTC's green guides. I think, and I'm a lawyer, so take this with a grain of salt or even an ocean of salt, but I think they're relatively readable as far as regulations go.
Yeah.
They provide really basic rules of the road for how to market around sustainability, how to make claims that are backed by evidence, how to make certain types of claims like free of claims, So if you're going to say something is BPA free or PFAS free, how do you make that claim in a way that doesn't deceive the consumer? At a really fundamental level, the rules of the road are you shouldn't make claims that aren't founded in some sort of reasonable basis. So do you have evidence for your claim? If you don't have evidence, then you shouldn't make the claim.
Right. Yeah, just a general rule of thumb.
But then from there, it builds out. So what does evidence look like in a recyclability context or in a free of context? And it provides rules of the road for that. The one nuance that I will say with the implementation of these EPR regulations that we were describing earlier, especially with regard to packaging, recyclability claims are going to be changing quite a bit in the next year or two. California has undertaken their own analysis of what it means for something to be recyclable. Previously, recyclability was determined by the availability of recycling within a certain population area. So if 60% of people within a given geography have access to a recycling facility that would take this product or this packaging in theory, then it's considered recyclable. California has changed this to how many recyclers accept it, actually take in the product or the material, which is a different question actually than accessibility. And so products that may have previously been considered recyclable may no longer be. And they've actually put out a whole list analyzing packaging materials, including things like wood and plastics and metal and cardboard, paper, and have put out a definitive list of materials that may be claimed as recyclable. Make sure to take a look at that list if you're making recyclability claims about your product or about your packaging.
Awesome. Well, James, thank you so much for your time, because I know you got to jump, but I am going to follow up with you because we may have to unpack some of this at a deeper level, perhaps on future episodes. But I think the takeaway, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a very significant, very real rise in sustainability regulations, particularly around transparency related to products and their impact on human and environmental health.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is the trend, and brands that have a sustainability team or a sustainability person, talk to your sustainability person. They have probably been tracking a lot of this stuff and have been trying to figure out how to navigate all these different issues as they arise. It's a lot for a person to take on, and I think brands will need to think through how to properly resource and how to properly organize the sort of triangle of compliance, sustainability, and legal. How do we coordinate that triangle effectively and resource that triangle effectively? This is going to be a huge challenge for brands. I've already seen it. I think I will continue to see it. But these changes, from a regulatory perspective, will require changes internally among brands. But there's a lot to be excited about for consumers. There's a lot to be excited about for brands that are looking to push ahead on sustainability. It's going to be a really fascinating time.
Well, James, just one last thing. Where can brands reach you if they need help? What's the best place to reach you? And then I'll say thank you so much for your time. It was great talking with you, as always.
No, it was great to talk to you as well. They can find me at our website, martenlaw.com. That's MARTEN law.com. If they just Google James Pollack, POLLACK, and Marten Law, they'll find me. They're welcome to shoot me an email or give me a call.
Awesome. All right, cool. Special thanks to James for all he does to protect what he loves, and stay tuned for new episodes of The Sustainable Angler dropping soon. If you enjoyed this episode, an absolutely free way to show your support is by leaving it a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. It's a chance to tell me what you love about the show, and it helps others discover it too. Thanks for listening and for protecting what you love.